Welcome back to Decked Out Jon Boats. Today we're going to be interviewing Randy Blaukat. He started out in a Jon boat. Now he's going back to an aluminum boat on the Pro Tour. Y'all hang around to find out more. First of all, how many years have you spent on tour?
I started the fall of 1985 is when I fished my first Bassmaster Invitational, and that's back when the season started in the fall and ended in the spring. So I've been fishing full time since the fall of 1985.
And you've seen a big evolution in the sport, I'm sure,
Uh,
since you've been around.
it's unbelievable. It's just like it's unrecognizable, really. I mean, for those guys like myself that have been around for a long time. I mean, particularly the past 5 to 7 years, particularly, it's really just it's the face has changed completely on it. I mean, just how everything works.
Yeah, as far as on a pro level, it is definitely moving towards an elitist sport, and that's one of the things that Decked Out Jon Boats is about. Is it gets everybody out on the water.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And that's, back when I started out, I think that I bought, or I in 1985, I got on with a sponsorship with Ranger. And back then, you could buy the top of the line, fully rigged Ranger fiberglass rig for like uh, $14,000. And now there's so many different boats out there. The fiberglass rigs are they're $100,000 or within a few $1,000s of it. And the reason, getting back to the aluminum rigs, the reason I'm running it this year and the reason I've been thinking about it is when I started back in like the late 70s and 1980s. That's when I was in high school. I wanted to be a professional fisherman, and I didn't have any money at all. I mean, I bought an aluminum 16-foot aluminum Jon boat at a rummage sale for $250 that I had saved up mowing lawns, and I struggled for 2 or 3 years, really just to go to the lake. I mean, just to have enough money to drive 30 miles down to Grand Lake. So I know what it's like to start out not having any money, but having this super intense love for tournament fishing, and that's what got me thinking. Now it's like people that are in my situation now in 2020, they can't make it like I did back in the late 1970s. The industry has evolved to a point where financially they just can't do it, and it wasn't like that in the early 1980s. The sport was at a state back then where you didn't if you just worked hard, you could work a part-time job and you could still compete in tournaments. And you can't do that now with just the price of the entry fees, the price of equipment, price of boats and motors, electronics. And
right.
I just think that's just such a tragedy in the sport, because I know for guys like myself that we're just ate up with it. We just loved it. There's nothing else you wanted to do except be a tournament fisherman. And to not have that opportunity simply because you don't come for money, that's what really motivated me to want to run an aluminum this year, to really, I guess, make a statement, so to speak, a little bit.
Right.
So
So not only is it a financial thing, but there's actually rules that say that your boat has to be this big. And am I
right.
mistaken? It's got to be at least 19 foot. Is that right?
I believe
18.
I think it's 18 foot and has to have. I know this, depending upon the organization. I know like FLW, they had a rule where you had to have a minimum of 150 horsepower, 17 or 18 feet. I don't think Bassmaster has a horsepower limitation. They may have a length limitation. I'm not sure, but there are some limitations. But in my opinion, I mean, if your boat meets Coast Guard, requirements, if you got a adequate live well and you got all the safety equipment, why can't you do it? I don't understand why they limit somebody like that, yet they allow another angler to spend $25,000 on electronics for a boat that creates this unlevel playing field for people that can't afford that. That's sort of the bone I've got with it,
Exactly.
on stuff like that.
So, like when I think of Randy Blaukat, I always think of a jerkbait. So, from the research I've been reading about, your history is actually getting into spots that most people don't get into,
Hmm.
um, and you actually won a tournament by pulling the plug in your live well and
Yep.
getting into somewhere that most people couldn't get.
Yep. Hmm.
So, tell us a
That's the
little bit
way.
about.
Well, that's what I used to look for all the time. I used to look for these hard to reach areas that were, back here in Missouri and Oklahoma where I fish a lot. We've got a lot of those, or we used to have a lot of the lakes that have the creeks that the mouths of them were silted in, maybe just like an inch or two deep. And if you could get back over that old silt line, you could get back into the old creek channel, and that's back. You could win a lot of tournaments doing that. And so I always looked for that type of water. These places where you had to blow mud flats, you had to get out and push your boat, you had to dig channels with a shovel. I mean, stuff that was hard to get into. And that's sort of the way that I always fished on that. That tournament that you're talking about at Bugs Island, Bassmaster Top 100. Um, the second day of the tournament, the water, this Hurricane Hugo had came through. It was an October tournament at Bugs Island, and this hurricane came through and flooded out all the lakes in Virginia there. And when we got there, the first day of the tournament, water was in the willow trees pretty good, and I caught a pretty good bag of fish and practiced flipping willows down on the lower end of the lake. But they were pulling the water super hard. And first day of the tournament, I think I ground out. I think I had like four that weighed 9 pounds, and the water on that low end was pulling down so hard that I was losing a lot of the water depth in the willow trees. So the second day of the tournament, I just said I got to make a move, and I knew that if I ran farther up the lake, I'd get into a little bit dirtier water that and probably those fish would still be using the bushes, even though the water was falling. So I ran up the lake and I just said, man, I'm going to pick a creek. I'm going to run back up in the creek and work my way out. And I ran up in this creek. I'd never seen it before. And I got back in there, and there was this bridge that the water was so high you couldn't get underneath it. But I looked underneath the bridge, and I could see like a bunch of willow trees back in there, tons of them. And I knew the water had been up for like 3 weeks. So I knew nobody had been back in there for like 3 weeks. I said, man, if I could get back in there, I know I could probably catch them. So there was about maybe, I don't know, 18 inches of leeway between the top of the bridge and the water. So back then I had a three, I think it was a 340 or 350 Ranger, and I reached over there, pulled the plug on the boat, took out windshields, cowlings, trolling motor, everything, and sunk the boat down as far as it would go. Those Rangers, they don't sink; they'll fill with water
Right.
and just stay level. Excuse me. So I filled the boat up with water, got on my back with my partner, and just pushed my way underneath it and squeezed underneath there, and then builds it out on the other side and wound up winning the tournament back in there, doing that. But that was an easy one. I mean, I've had tournaments where, like I said, I've actually gotten a shovel and I've dug out ditches that are like 30, 40 yards, with a shovel in order to have a channel to run through at 40, 50 miles an hour to jump these sandbars and jumping logs and all this type of stuff. So aluminum boats are right up my alley as far as that goes.
So is so we moved into the electronic age where everybody's fishing offshore and we're really improving the offshore fishing. Do you think that's the next frontier is getting back into those places that we used to get to because we didn't have the electronics to fish out deep?
Well, I think that, you know, this is like, I think about this a lot. This whole electronics deal is really on my mind a lot, simply because what we talked about, how it creates this unlevel playing field where some anglers can go afford to spend $20,000 on electronics, and the next angler is worrying about how he's going to fill his boat up with gas. And that's what I'm talking about, this unlevel playing field. And I was fishing offshore before people were even doing it. Like back in Grand Lake, I mean, I'd spend hours idling out there with my flashers, finding these breaks and offshore structures. And I was structure fishing before anyone really did it back in that part of the country. But what has happened is technology has evolved so quickly with that it's so easy to get left behind on that. It evolves every single year, and it's not necessarily keeping up with the technology that is that difficult, but it's keeping up with affording that technology, because every time there's a technological advance, it costs more money. And you know, and that's why a lot of anglers have gotten left behind. That's why a lot of anglers have really accelerated as far as they've taken their game to the next level because they can afford that technology. And again, it goes back to the level playing field, which we don't have. But to get back to your question, there is, I think what you're going to see is that this technology is going to get so advanced, and it is already, where all the key spots, as far as all the offshore structure that is easily identifiable on mapping systems, those particular areas are going to get just as much pressure as like a good section of laydowns or good section of boat docks on a lake that's visible, because anymore the visible structure we have on the bank is no different than the offshore structure you have on a good mapping system. People that know how to read that. So I think it's sort of going to neutralize a little bit. And the thing about that is it sort of gives everybody their chance to let their own skill set, succeed, because a lot of anglers out there, you got anglers like Aaron Martins and Jacob Wheeler that don't even hardly fish. They just idle around and graph all the time, and they've made that work for themselves. And then you've got anglers like, John Cox, that the only reason he uses the depth finder is for a GPS waypoint. He doesn't even hardly look at how deep the water is. So
Right.
I think you can do well fishing, both ways. But I think eventually it's all going to come back cycling. It's just going to be, whoever figures out the fish that particular day, and there's always more than one way to catch them.
Right. More than one pattern working.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about the boat you're running for the 2020 season.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it's a rain.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Spencer. It's a Ranger 198P. It's at 19-foot aluminum with a 150 on it, and it's I got that boat this past December, and I'd been toying around with running aluminum for several years, and I kept thinking, it's like, this, if I do this, I know there's gonna be some drawbacks, but at the same time, it's gonna give me some more opportunities. And I got thinking about back when I first started fishing, and as far as where my roots came from and how I like to fish, and I said, this sort of goes back to the way that I like to fish. I mean, the type of water I like to look for, and I'm just going to give it a try for a year. I mean, and that's what I pulled the trigger on it, got the boat in December, and it's been pretty much what I thought on there. I mean, there's give and takes with it. Overall, I'm really happy with the boat. I mean, the fishability factor of it is awesome. I haven't really seen any limitation to it. The only limitations, if there is one, is I've had to sort of reorganize how I pack the boat. Obviously, you don't have the storage that you do in a glass boat. So instead of like carrying 100 green pumpkin worms with me, I'll carry 25 in the boat and the rest in the truck. It's just sort of been a packing evolution. And then the second to that is you can't run as fast or as fast in rough water. So you sort of have to make that allotment. And you have to, but you make that up in fishability and accessibility. When you're fishing around shallow cover, it's so much easier to stop and start that boat, which is a big deal. A 21-foot fiberglass boat, it has so much momentum going forward. It takes a lot of power and a lot of backwash to turn that boat around, which it doesn't in the aluminum. I think you can be stealthier in the aluminum. And my goal for at least one or two tournaments this year is to be able to get into water with that boat that nobody else really can. And on top of that, I think just the fact of simplifying and simplification can maybe add up to more success. You don't have as many options in an aluminum boat, so you have to really get more laser focused and commit on what you're doing. And that's what it has been for me. And I started off pretty good. I finished 18th at the Bass Open and Toho on it. And if I keep catching them like that every tournament, I'll keep running them next year too, the aluminum boat. It's just like, if I have one of those years where it just sort of, you know, everything clicks on it, why not?
So you brought up a good point. I tell everybody that fishing out of electric only boat makes you a better fisherman because you have to fish the water in front of you.
Hmm.
Kind of the same deal you're talking about because you don't have the range and the ability. Or, was part of the reason is that did the schedule play into your choice? Like, are y'all going up to the Great Lakes or any of the massive bodies of water where wind can be a concern?
No, I don't. I think the biggest water we have is maybe Sam Rayburn in September. But I tell you what, on that boat, I mean, we had one day down at Lake Kissimmee down there that it blew like 25 or 30, and there was we had maybe I don't know, 2.5 foot waves this one afternoon, maybe 3 footers, and I took out across there, and it was a soft, great ride, even in that rough water. It did get me a little bit wetter, simply because of the design of the boat. Like
Right,
if you're going at a 2 foot wave at a 45-degree angle, you're going to get spray, even if you're in a fiberglass boat, and you get more spray in aluminum. But from running those waves in that 198 Ranger, I guarantee I could take that boat out into 5 and 6 foot waves, and if I could navigate those waves through the troughs, I could easily run big 5 6 footers in that boat. I mean, I'd have no problem taking it anywhere I want to, just slow me down a little bit.
right. Because even with the aluminum boats, the technology has advanced. I mean, we're not running. That's not a flat bottom John boat like what everybody used to
No,
run.
not at all. And with anything, boat driving, I don't care if you're in an aluminum boat or a glass boat. It's all about knowing how to read the water and knowing how to attack the angle. That's the whole key, because people don't realize how big a water you can take in an aluminum boat. I mean, you can take huge waves in there if you just know how to run it.
Right.
You have to
And that,
tack them, and just see how they're rolling, and see the distance between them, and it's just experience on the water.
and that lighter aluminum boat probably reacts faster to the water
Yep.
beneath it. So probably is
Yeah.
more like a bobber that helps you stay on top of the waves.
Right. Yeah, definitely. But that doesn't bother me at all as far as the rough water. It's just, like I said, you have to time it for the speed, because like on my boat, on a full load, on a fully loaded tournament day where I've got a full live well, and say I've got a heavy partner with me, I'm running, low 50s, 52, 54, something like that, instead of like mid 60s you would in a glass boat. So you sort of have to, factor that in a little bit, which that's not that big of a deal to me anyway. I remember back in 1988, I fished with. That's the year Clun won Angler of the Year for on bass, and I fished with him. I drew him out in the tournament at Bull Shoals in 1988, the year he won Angler of the Year, and he was running this prototype skeeter, one of these big giant skeeters, and that boat was slow. I mean, it ran, the top speed on that boat, I remember, was like 50 miles an hour. And he won Angler of the Year that year running out of a 50-mile-an-hour boat. So,
Yeah.
maybe that's, you got to use that to your advantage.
So let's talk a little bit about the financial side of this decision. So I know bass fishermen, especially the professionals, are numbers guys because you have to be because less money out equals more money in your pocket at the end of the month.
Hmm.
So what is the retail on that aluminum boat versus the average rig that somebody's running on tour?
Well, I think that obviously it depends on how you rig it out. The the way that the rig that I have, the way I have mine set up right now, which I've got the power poles on it, I've got the 12-inch Lowrance graphs, I got the Ultrex trolling motor, hydraulic jack plate, so I've got all the options on it. I'm guessing if you bought that boat new, the way that I've got it rigged out right now, it's going to be right around 40,000 probably. If you obviously if you bought a top of the line, you know, Ranger, Skeeter, Phoenix or Vexa, something like that, you're looking, that same boat is going to be, upper 70s to close to $100,000 depending upon how you got it. So you're looking at least half the cost. I mean, from what I've seen, as far as to get a rig that's tournament ready to go. So that's pretty close. I think they're about half the cost overall.
And have you run any numbers as far as how much gas you think you'll save for 1 year on tour?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know driving to Florida, I mean, I could tell immediately that I didn't burn near the gas in my truck by far. I mean, I got a lot better mileage in the truck, and I've got a smart gauge on my aluminum boat, and wide open, I burned 14.8 gallons per hour wide open, and I was burning in my 250 on my glass rig. I was burning 22 gallons an hour wide open. So you can see the difference there. So the 30-gallon tank I have in the aluminum rig is comparable to having like a 45-gallon tank in a glass rig. So it equals out there. So yeah, the cost, depending upon how much you drive and how much you fish, I mean, the cost is going to be significant just in gas alone, for sure.
So if you would, let's take a step back and talk about some of the first boats you owned.
Well, the first boat I owned, like I said, I was a sophomore in high school, reading Bassmaster magazine, and I'd been wading creeks and sneaking into farm ponds my whole life, and I wanted to get a bass boat, and I wanted to deck it out like the guys I saw, like Roland Martin did, and all the pictures I saw on Bassmaster. And this was back in 1978, so you got to realize that it professional fishing had only been around for 10 years, so this is way back in the day. So I went over. There was a run. I was living in Joplin, Missouri. I was going, with my mom and dad, and I went over, and they had a rummage sale over on the west side of town, and they had this guy had this John boat, a 16-foot flat bottom, and with a trailer, all beat up. In fact, the thing leaked, and I bought it for like $200, I think it was, or 250. And then I found an old used, like a 1968 9 horsepower motor, put that on there. And then I put, like, I built front and back casting decks with plywood myself and put like indoor outdoor carpet on it. Bought a little cheap trolling motor, little cheap Lowrance flasher, put it on there, and I fished out of that boat for like 4 years. And I had to about every 3 or 4 months I had to take it down to the aluminum welding shop because it was so old that the metal was all fatigued in it, and I'd always have to get it welded to keep it from leaking. That was my first boat. My second boat was I traded that in on a fiberglass. I think it was called a Challenger bass boat with a 50 horsepower, all faded out. I mean, it was pretty old. But here, that was a big step up for me from the 9 horse to go to 50 horsepower. And I remember in that particular boat, I had power tilt, but I didn't have power trim. Like, it would tilt up like just to tilt it out of the water, but you couldn't trim it when you're running down the
Right.
lake. It didn't have that. So I remember how jealous I was about guys that could actually trim their motor up when they were running down the lake, because mine had always porpoised real bad because I'd have to set it on one level. I had that boat for a couple of years, I think.
So
But then my
first tournament, which boat was this out of?
first tournament was the first tournament I ever fished was the Kidney Foundation Buddy Bass Tournament at Table Rock in 1978. Out of that 9 horse with the camouflaged boat on or my 16-foot camouflage flat bottom with a 9 horse. That was my first tournament out of Table Rock, out of Campbell's Point Marina. And I remember I ran around to the very first creek, about a half mile from the ramp, and I finished 5th place in that tournament. I caught a 7.5 pounder and like a 5 pounder or something that day on a black jig and pork frog, and made a check in my first tournament with that.
Awesome.
But then my first real boat is in the 83 or 84. I was going to school, and I was working full time, going to school part time, college, working at night full time, and I got a 1980 Champion boat with 150 horsepower, that mean 15 Champion with a 150, and that was my first fully tournament type rig boat. And then after that, I got my deal with Ranger when I made the Redman All American in 1984, and started fishing bass the next year. And I've been with Ranger ever since.
You have anything else you would like to cover while we're out here?
Well, I just, I know, a lot of your audience, they're mainly, they fish out of aluminum boats. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there that are interested in tournament fishing. I mean, to whatever level, it could be something just like local stuff. It could be aspirations to fish bigger. And I would just say, don't get discouraged if you're having a hard time affording it, because if it's something you're passionate about and you have a lot of desire to do it, there's ways to make it work. It may take a little bit longer than somebody that's well funded, but if you have that love for it and you really want to do it, just stay with it. And there's ways to make it happen, because I'm a prime example of somebody that didn't come from any money at all, and I've been able to fish for a living my whole life pretty much. So it just depends how bad you want it.
So one advice for people that are looking to elevate their bass fishing game. What do you think is the difference between what a pro does versus what a weekend warrior does?
Well, there's couple different things on that, and it's changed over the years. The biggest thing that you can do to learn right now is to just watch as many tournament related YouTube videos as you can, because you can learn so much as far as technique and area and how people approach water from that quicker than anything. And then second to that is you have to take that information that you gain and you have to put it on the water yourself, and you have to develop your own style. So it's that combination. Is you can't become a good angler simply by fishing a lot now, and you can't become a good angler simply by watching TV all the time about it. You have to absorb that information, find out what works for you, and discard the rest. So just keep your mind in it. Just try to educate yourself as much as you can, keep up with the latest stuff, and then go apply it on the water as much as you can.
Well, Randy, I can tell you that from my personal experience, that's exactly what I did. And you were one of those people that I was watching on TV and trying to emulate out there on the water. And it's been my pleasure having you, on Decked Out Jon Boats.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Well, if somebody's looking to follow Randy Blaukat, how can they keep up with you and your season?
Well, the best thing is just to go on my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler, or or go to my YouTube page. Just Google Randy Blaukat YouTube, and you can follow me on YouTube. I'm gonna be doing a lot more with that coming up, but my Facebook or YouTube is probably the best way on that.
Well, my friend, it has been a great honor, and I appreciate your time.